What is up? I'm Swall Dog. I like to build cool stuff. And today, you guys, I have got a new project vehicle that I'm working on. Are you ready to see it? Ready? There it is. Bam! Toyota Land Cruiser. I know what you're thinking. Swall Dog, what is going on? You're a Jeep guy. Why are you working on a Toyota Land Cruiser? Great question. Glad you asked. Let me tell you why. This vehicle is actually owned by one of my buddies, longtime friend. Like, when I think about childhood friends, like, he's one of the ones, like, earliest memories that I can remember, right? Anyways, so this Land Cruiser, his mom used to drive. I thought it was all silver. They might have had two. The one was all silver. Anyways, and I remember the interior. Man. Like going to Cub Scouts, carpooling to school. We carpooled elementary school all through junior high. My friend's got this rig now and he's turning it into overland adventure style vehicle. Needed some help doing a few things on it, so I'm gonna help him out with that. It is, hold on, I gotta make sure I get this right for all the Toyota guys, so I don't get slayed. It is a 1993 FZJ80. I'm sure all the Toyota guys are just cringing right now as I'm saying this. Got, let's see, 214,000 miles. Let's pop the hood. Yep, here it is. 1FZFE. Is that the motor type? I don't know. I don't know Toyotas. I don't know Toyotas, okay? I'm sure the Toyota guys are just, they're hating me right now. Let's talk about what I'm gonna do. As much as crap as I give Toyota, because I'm a Jeep guy, they are pretty sweet, okay? Not gonna lie. Let's talk about what's on the list of things to do. I got a bunch of parts here, a bunch of things on the list. Suspension bushings, these are for the track bar, lower control arms, or radius arm. I don't know what you technically call it. What do the Toyota guys call it? Do they call it a radius arm? These are for the frame side, these are for the axle side, track bar, sway bar, bushings. There is also more bushings in here. These are for the rear, so upper control arms, track bar, sway bar links, sway bar bushings. We're gonna do all those. Cruiser Outfitter stickers. Oh, come on you guys, come on. Really? Cruiser Outfitters, what if? Get that out of here. Get that out of here. Alright, what else we got? Brake lines. I don't know why there's 7 of them. We'll get them changed out. And we've got, in here, we gotta do one of the wheel bearings too. My buddy already did the right side. I guess we gotta do the left side, reseal and whatever is involved in that. And I think that's what's in here. The whole kit. To do that. Shims, bearings, seals. There is some AC stuff, a couple other seals. He replaced the compressor, still has a leak. We're gonna replace the rest of the seals, charge it up, figure out the rest of the leak on the AC system. Let's go over the list. Wheel bearings, oh, steering box, right here. Rebuild kit for the power steering box, so we're gonna pull that off, reseal that. All the brake lines, some of the hard lines too. Suspension bushings, we're just gonna do some inspections on the suspension joints and axles and around the power steering gearbox mount. Sometimes there can be some failures around where the power steering box mounts and they make a brace, so we're gonna inspect that. Maybe we'll have to put a brace on that. He has new shocks that we're gonna be putting on and newer coils. I think that's everything. To get started, I'm gonna start out by just tearing apart the front end. So let's get on that. Hey, quick rundown on what I got done yesterday. I actually didn't work on the cruiser today. Had to do some training for work, but I just wanted to show you what I got done. I got the whole front end jacked up. I'm gonna work on the front end first, dive into the suspension joints. I pulled these radius lower control arms off. So these are the two front bolts. These brackets, 12 mil bolts to get those off. These, the front two on the axle side, 22 mil, and the back one on the frame side, it goes up there, 24 mil. Something I wanted to show you, when you break these loose on the axle side, the nuts have little catches right there, so it's almost like a lock nut. So when you try to break it loose, normally you try to break the nut loose because there's going to be less friction without the whole bolt in the way, but in this instance it's easier to break the bolt itself loose than the nut. But then the frame side is the exact opposite. The nut has the washer right there, and the bolt itself is the one, I don't know if you can see those little indents right there. Rule of thumb, the side you want to try to break loose is the one that has the washer on it. So look for that, just a little tip. Now let's get these control arms and start to press these bushings out. Bushings done in the control arms. Just got back from my buddy's shop. I didn't take any video of pressing these bushings out, but I will show you what I did. I used his Harbor Freight press to press these out. The toughest part, honestly, was getting the bottom plates lined up. I just used those square plates that the press comes with that has the little cutouts. I used the smallest triangles on each side, and fitting them underneath the bottom here, so when you press this out, was probably the toughest part, because there was a couple bushings. Let's see if I can see one. Like this one right here. You can see I didn't quite get it lined up, so when I started pressing it, it was hitting right there. I don't know if you can see that or not. And so it moved a little bit until that was smashed, and then it wouldn't go any farther. So lining that up was probably the most difficult. But what I did, so they sell a tool in my research and to press these out, a press set that has 4 different dies to be able to press these bushings out that are 15 thousandths smaller in diameter than the bushings, so they line up. And I didn't want to buy that set to just do these one set of bushings, but in all reality, if I owned this vehicle, it would be worth it, I think, to purchase those press dies to change these bushings out, even if it was just the one time. But even if there's a chance that you were going to do them again later on down the road, I think it would have made it a lot easier, and I'll show you why. What I ended up doing was I found some sockets that were almost the same diameter. So this socket that I had, this is actually just a Harbor Freight 1 1/8" deep socket impact, and it is 10 thousandths smaller than this bushing, and that one actually worked pretty well. The medium-sized bushing, so this was for the track bar right here. The medium-sized bushing right here that goes on the end on the frame side of these radius arms, this one, I had this socket that was 20 thousandths smaller than the bushing, but I still had an issue because the socket, if you can see, has a beveled edge on it. And the problem is these bushings, this metal sleeve is so thin that you need to be pressing against that. You can tell on this, when I didn't have it quite lined up, you can see right here and on this side here where the beveled part of the socket would actually start to slide in and kind of mushroom out. So then it's not pressing down, but I was able to use this socket to get the 2 frame sides out. And then for the big bushings on the axle, I had a socket that was about 100 thousandths smaller than this bushing, and it didn't work at all. You can kind of see there. I thought it might, but when I started pressing, maybe if it was flat on the bottom, But again, it's got that, this socket has that bevel right there. So when you're pressing, I think it's just trying to flare out instead of pressing down. It's trying to flare out the sides, and it wouldn't even budge. And they're in there pretty tight anyways. I was soaking them the day before with some penetrating oil, just letting it soak. I think that might have helped, but they were still pretty tight. They didn't have the big pop that I've seen in some other YouTube videos when people are trying to press these out. And I did end up just on one of the frame side ones throwing a little bit of heat right here, but that might actually have not been necessary if I had a better pressing tool, because I think that socket was kind of battling it. But what I ended up doing on the axle side bushings is this piece of tube right here that was almost, I think it was actually the exact same size as the bushings. And what I did is I threw it in the lathe and machined it down so it was about 15 thousandths smaller than the bushing, and used that to press them out. And I machined it far enough so that I could press it all the way out. So, and that actually worked really slick. And then to put them back in, what I did on the track bar, I actually just used this socket to press it back in, and that worked really well. When you press them in, you just need to press them till they're flush. You know, they're going to be flush on both sides. So the bottom plate with the small triangles, I just pushed them tight, so the small hole in the bottom of the triangle would just fit, so this center pin could go through there, but then the outsides would hit the plate and bottom out. And then I used, these were just some scraps from my buddy's plas table that he keeps around. This one fit pretty awesome for these two joints. It was too big for this one, but for this one and this one, it fit right there, and then just put that piece on top of it, and I was able to press it until they bottomed out. So that's how it went down. Like I said, I really think that tool would probably be worth it if this was a vehicle that I owned and there was a chance that I was going to do these at least more than once. But since we just did it the one time, I was able to make it work with what I had. So I'm going to throw these back on now, and what I'm going to do is, these are the bolts. I'm going to actually throw a little bit of anti-seize on these bolts before I put it back together, just so the next time it might come out easier. And I might actually, I don't know if this is just corrosion or if there was actually some Loctite on this nut. I might throw just a drop of Loctite on the end here. But also, I mentioned it before, on these bolts you got to be careful on which side has the washer and which side has the flanged. I think on the frame side the bolt has the flanged head, and on the axle side, if I remember right, the axle side is the flanged nuts. And so the side without the flange, the side with the washer, is the one that you want to tighten up. So I'm gonna try to line these little nubs back up with the little indents. I mean, they should just make new indents, but I'm gonna try to line them up with the old indents when I go back together with it, just to give it a nice snug fit, and then tightening it up on this side with the washer, make sure it's tight. So let's get them back together. And just like that, we're done with the front bushings, at least. Let me show you how I put them on. What I ended up doing is I did the front bolts first, right, on this axle. So what I had is I had the axle basically resting on the shocks, and then I had the jack under it to hold most of the weight. But once I put the control arms under here, and I put the front two bolts on first, because those were the easiest, they'd be the easiest to get to without the control arm all the way on. So I put the front two bolts on first. I anti-seized the bolts all the way except the last 1/4 inch of the bolt. I didn't put any anti-seize because I was going to just put 1 drop of Loctite, but I didn't do that yet. I anti-seized the bolts, put them back in the same way they came off, the same direction, because I wanted the nuts or the bolt head that have those little tabs on them that I talked about earlier, I wanted them to line up with the marks that were in the brackets originally. So I put them all back in the same spot. The front ones first, like I said. Got the control arm in, put the bolts in, screwed the nuts on just hand tight, and then I went to the frame side. Now, when I did the frame side, can't really see this one, but this control arm, the bolt hole, it was back maybe 2-3 inches, because since the axle was just sitting here basically on the way to the shocks and the coil pushing down, it was kind of pushing it back a little bit. So what I needed to do, pull the axle forward a little bit so I could get those back frame control arm bolts to line up. And the way I did it is I got this little come along right here, little chain come along. And you could basically use anything. You could use a ratchet strap, you could even use a rope. But what I did is I hooked it right around the axle here without interfering with the brake lines, and then hooked it right here to this. Hooked it on there. And I was able to just pull it forward until I could get those bolt holes to line up. And then I used my sleever bar right here to kind of stick it in there, line the bolt holes up so I could stick the bolt in. Put the nut on, just hand tight. Did the same thing to the other side. And it doesn't take much pressure to get this forward. You could even use a rope. You could probably tie a rope to the front axle, feed it through here, and pull it. Just enough to get a little pressure. Did that to both sides, and then I moved on to the track bar right here. Now I made the mistake of putting the bolt on the frame side first, and then trying to line this one up, and it did not want to line up super easy because it's got a captured nut on the back. So I ended up taking the bolt back out of the frame side. So put this side in first on the axle, because then you can move the track bar around to get the bolt to go all the way through and line up with the nut. Put that in hand tight, also Loctite, or I didn't Loctite that, but I also anti-seized that. Then I went to the frame side, put the bolt in, anti-seized it. I had to do the same thing with the chain, the come along, just to go side to side to get it to line up. And you kind of have to manipulate the steering a little bit to be able to get the bolt, so, you know, raise it up and down, whatever. I actually ended up undoing the steering from the Pitman arm because I needed to undo it anyways, because I was doing some other work. So once I got the track bar and control arms bolts in, hand tight, then I undid the brake line and the breather on this side, because I'm redoing the brake lines anyways, so I needed to undo those anyways, so I could drop the axle all the way down, because I wanted to change the shocks and the coils. So I unbolted the shocks, dropped it all the way down so I could pull the coils out, put the new coils in, lifted it back up with the jack, bolted the new shocks in. And then what I did, and this might be overthinking things, but I jacked up the front axle so it had the weight of the vehicle on it, just almost to where it was just pulling off the jack stands, and then I set it back down on the jack stands and dropped the axle just barely. What I wanted was the axle to be at ride height with the vehicle when I tightened the bolts for the suspension. And my thinking was I wanted to tighten those bushings at the ride height of the vehicle, so that I didn't want to tighten them when the axle was totally dropped and then raise it up, because I didn't want to put some kind of a bind or twist on those bushings. I wanted them to be at like the most neutral position at ride height. Like I said, that might be overthinking it, but in my head I thought that was the best option. I got the axle to ride height, I pulled the nuts back off, put 1 drop of Loctite on the end of the bolt, put the nut back on, and then I hand tightened the side with the tabs on it, whether it was the nut side or the flanged head side. I tightened that by hand, until I could kind of feel those, it started to tighten up and those little grooves locked into the little holes where the marks that originally from those tabs. And then what I did is I tightened up the other side, the washer side, with my 3/8 electric impact. So always tighten, like I said, I had mentioned it before, always tighten the washer side, the one without those little tabs on it, because if you try to tighten the side with the tabs, with those little indents on them, it'll just flatten, it'll just ruin them. So, and it defeats the whole purpose of having those little lock nuts. So that's the way I did it, and it seemed to work out pretty slick. If you watched this video all the way through, thanks for watching it. I super appreciate it. I hope it was helpful in doing something like this. If it was, give it a like. If you want to see more content like this, we got to do the bushings on the rear axle. Subscribe. Until next time, go build something cool. Later. Here you go, Kurt. Cruiser Kurt, you deserve this. You've earned it. Now be awesome.